He opened the door, expecting silence. Instead, he found a woman trembling in the snow, and 7 children behind her staring up at him like he might be the last safe place on earth. He never ordered a bride, but someone somehow sent him a family. Before we begin this remarkable true-to-the-heart story, if you believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and the healing power of love, consider subscribing. We tell stories that stay with you, long after the last word. Now let's begin. The old farmhouse sat crouched at the edge of a wind-beaten Montana hill, surrounded by skeletal trees and the hush of snow that hadn't yet fallen, but already whispered in the air. Daniel Crane stood in the dim morning light, staring into a chipped porcelain mug of black coffee as if it held answers. It didn't. It never did. 3 years had passed since the accident. Every morning, Daniel went through the same motions: shave, dress, make breakfast, set 2 plates, then remove 1. The 4th chair at the kitchen table remained untouched, just as it had since the funeral. A small, blue-cushioned chair. It had once belonged to Caleb, his 6-year-old son. The garage, once Daniel's temple of purpose, was now a sealed tomb. Its windows were covered in dust and yellowed tape. Inside sat half-assembled robotic arms and mobility prototypes tools he had designed to help children like Caleb, children who needed second chances at movement. After the accident, he'd walked out mid-build and never touched the tools again. The world had shrunk to the size of Daniel's grief, and he had no interest in expanding it. He had learned to keep things small, predictable, safe. That morning began like any other, quiet, numb, until the knock. 3 short raps, then silence. Daniel frowned. No one ever came to the house. He hadn't had a visitor in months, maybe longer. He set the mug down, grabbed the flannel shirt draped over the back of the chair, and opened the door. And froze. There on the snow-dusted porch stood a woman. She was slender, but wore a bulky, worn-out coat that hung off her frame. Her hair was damp, tangled from the wind, and her cheeks were red with cold. She held a baby wrapped tightly in a makeshift sling across her chest. Behind her, 7 children stood in a ragged line, some barefoot, others in oversized shoes. One boy held a cracked plastic suitcase duct-taped along the side. A girl about 11 with 2 large eyes and an unmistakable air of quiet leadership kept a protective hand on the shoulder of a younger sibling. The woman cleared her throat and spoke with a soft, accented voice. "Are you Mr. Crane?" Daniel blinked. "I am. Daniel Crane." She hesitated. I was told Matthew Crane lived here. Is he?" Daniel's stomach twisted. "Matthew was my younger brother. He passed away 3 months ago." The woman took a half-step back as if absorbing a physical blow. Her eyes dropped to the snow-covered porch. "I see," she whispered. Daniel glanced at the children now huddled close together. One sniffled, another coughed. "What is this?" he asked, his tone more bewildered than harsh. "Who are you?" "My name is Clara," she said quietly. I came to marry him." It took Daniel a beat to register what she meant. "You're a yes, a mail-order bride. We wrote letters. He paid the agency. He promised a new life, for all of us. All of you. These are my children, all adopted. Some from the camp, others from the orphan train programs. I could not leave them behind." Daniel stared at her numbness, giving way to something dangerously close to anger. Or was it grief, masked in confusion? This can't be right," he said. "I have his last letter," Clara replied, fumbling with the inside of her coat until she pulled out a crumpled envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Matthew's. Daniel didn't take it. He couldn't. She looked at him again. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "We have nowhere else to go. I didn't come to beg. I came because he said there would be a future here." Daniel looked beyond her to the expanse of the white fields, the distant gray skies, the silent barns. Then he looked back at the children, silent, exhausted, and oddly expectant. None of them cried. None complained, as if they'd long learned there wasn't much use in either. A stronger man might have invited them in. A kinder man would have done so without hesitation. Daniel wasn't sure he was either of those men anymore. "I have a barn," he finally said. "It's dry. There's hay. I can bring you blankets." Clara nodded. "Thank you." He turned, grabbed old quilts from the hallway closet, and lit a lantern. He didn't speak as they followed him across the frozen yard, their footsteps muffled in the soft layer of frost. That night, Daniel sat at his table again, 2 plates, as always. He stared at the 4th chair, imagining how Caleb would have reacted to the strangers in the barn. Caleb would have asked their names, asked if they wanted to play with his Legos, probably offered them the good cookies. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He hadn't thought of Caleb's voice in months, not like this, not so clearly. Outside, the wind howled. In the barn, a baby cried, and a woman hummed a lullaby that didn't need translating. Something had knocked on his door that morning. But it wasn't just Clara, it was life. And somehow he had let it in. By sunrise, the barn was nearly silent. Daniel stood at the kitchen window, watching as the pale Montana light filtered through the brittle trees, painting the frost a dull gold. He held his coffee with both hands, but didn't drink. The familiar bitterness in his cup had been replaced by something else, this morning restlessness. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. The woman with eyes too steady for someone so displaced. The children stoic, bone-thin yet strangely self-contained, like they knew how to wait for what might never come. The baby had cried once around midnight. Then the sound of Clara's voice, low and melodic, calmed it. After that, only wind. Daniel had given them quilts, an old propane heater, a few cans of soup with a rusted opener. And distance. That part had come easily. He told himself it was temporary. Just one night. But as he stepped outside and felt the ice crunch beneath his boots, the wind sliced through his jacket, sharp and biting. The sky was a flat curtain of gray. Snow flurries drifted in a way that warned of something heavier coming. Montana didn't do subtle when it came to storms. By the time he reached the barn, the scent of wood smoke and cinnamon hung faintly in the air. Inside, it was warmer than he expected. Clara had rigged a cooking fire from a barrel and salvaged bricks, and the children had arranged their bedding into tight rows like campers. One of the older girls was braiding another's hair. The boy with the duct-taped suitcase was helping sweep straw into neat corners. Clara stood when she saw him, her cheeks red, her scarf tied tighter than before. "Good morning," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "You found the extra propane?" "Yes. And thank you. Again. We'll be gone as soon as the road's clear." He said nothing, just looked at the children, then the sky beyond the open barn door. "It won't be today," he said. She looked up, following his gaze. "I figured," she replied. Daniel adjusted his gloves. "I'll bring down some more food. Maybe some firewood." He turned to leave, but a voice called out, "Mister." He looked back. A small boy, maybe 5 or 6, stood holding a drawing crude pencil lines on the back of a paper bag. Daniel recognized the image immediately. His house, the porch, the 7 kids. Clara. "You drew this," the boy nodded, solemn. "It's where we live now." Daniel's throat tightened unexpectedly. He managed a nod and walked out quickly before the boy could show him the rest. That afternoon, Daniel brought down a small electric stove and a sack of flour. Clara cooked flatbreads with powdered milk and canned peaches. The children ate in near silence, but their eyes followed him whenever he entered, unsure, watchful, as if they were waiting for the wind to change direction. It did around dusk. The flurries turned to a slow, soaking snowfall, heavy and wet, the kind that coated power lines and stranded trucks for days. Daniel checked the forecast. Negative temperatures, wind gusts reaching 30, and all the nearby shelters were overbooked. He muttered a curse under his breath, then stood in the foyer, staring at the old family room like it had betrayed him by still existing. He didn't want them there, but he also couldn't leave them in the barn. So he cleared out the blankets from the guest bedroom, hauled in an extra mattress from the attic, and after far too much hesitation, unlocked the linen closet that hadn't been opened in 3 years. Everything still smelled faintly of lavender and lemon oil. By nightfall, Clara and the children were inside. The baby slept in a laundry basket lined with towels. The older ones took turns at the sink, brushing their teeth with borrowed supplies. Clara moved like someone trying not to impose, though she clearly already had. Her every action whispered, "We won't be here long." Around midnight, Daniel found himself at the doorway to the living room. Clara sat curled on the far end of the couch, a worn sweater pulled around her shoulders. The fireplace glowed softly. The children were asleep upstairs. He stood awkwardly. "I figured I'd check the heat," he mumbled. She smiled faintly. "It's working fine." Silence stretched between them, not hostile, just unfamiliar. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "For what? For showing up the way we did? For turning your life upside down?" "You didn't," he replied. "Not really. It was already upside down." Clara studied his face. "You don't talk about him. Your brother. There's not much to say. He must have had good in him to try something like this." She glanced toward the children's room, to invite strangers into his life. Daniel didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly. "He wrote about you, you know." He looked up. "He said you were someone who once believed in fixing things. Not just machines, but people. Children." She paused. "He said he hoped being around us might bring that part of you back." Daniel stared into the fire. The flames crackled, filling the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I used to build robotic limbs, devices for kids who couldn't walk or hold a spoon. I worked for a children's hospital in Boise." His eyes didn't leave the flames. "Then one day I couldn't even help my own kid cross the street." Clara didn't speak. She didn't need to. "I shut it all down," he continued. "Garage, projects, purpose, everything." She nodded gently. "And yet here we are, sleeping in your house, warm, fed, safe." Daniel almost laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was bewilderment. "One night," he said. She tilted her head. "Is that still true?" Daniel didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. The snow didn't stop. By morning, the world outside Daniel's farmhouse had disappeared beneath a thick white silence. The barn was buried in drifts, the roads invisible, the wind howling with an eerie constancy like the world had gone breathless and still. Inside the house, however, things were beginning to stir. Not with noise exactly, but with movement, a kind Daniel hadn't known in years. Daniel stood in the hallway, watching from a distance, as Clara gently tied the baby to her chest, using a bedsheet. The children, barefoot and polite, filed into the kitchen in pairs, whispering to each other in that delicate language children develop when they've seen too much and learned too early not to ask for more. He expected mess, chaos. Instead, he found order. Not perfection, but rhythm. Clara moved like a woman who had run a household through war zones and refugee camps, efficient, silent, and remarkably unassuming. She didn't tell the children what to do, they simply followed her lead. By noon, the laundry was folded the woodpile by the back door, neatly restocked, and the children were playing a game involving plastic measuring cups and a box of dried beans. Daniel found himself standing in his own home, like a guest unable to decide whether to intervene or marvel. He finally cleared his throat. "You don't have to do all that." Clara turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I know." "Then why? Because it's what a house needs." He blinked. "A house." She smiled gently. "Yes, if you want it to stay a home." Later that day, Daniel stepped into the garage. The cold inside hit him like a memory. Dust floated in the air, slow and unbothered. Cobwebs hung from shelves that once held tools precise enough to rebuild a future. He hadn't crossed the threshold in nearly 3 years. He wandered past his old workbench, past a half-assembled gate stabilizer frame, still marked with Caleb's height in Sharpie. His fingers trailed the frame. A sudden vision of his son, giggling, wobbling forward in the prototype, shouting, "I'm doing it!" Daddy hit him like a fist. Daniel turned away quickly. He didn't come here for the past. He came for a space heater. Something practical, something present. But as he unplugged the old heater and turned to leave, his gaze fell on a stack of sketchbooks on the upper shelf. Caleb's sketches. Pages filled with stick figures, wearing robotic arms and flying shoes, complete with misspelled captions and crooked smiles. Daniel hesitated, then took one with him. That night, as the wind banged against the windows and the baby stirred in Clara's arms, Daniel surprised everyone by sitting down at the table for dinner. Not just his usual awkward hover at the edge, but truly sitting chair, pulled-in hands, folded plate full. The children sat with wide eyes, whispering among themselves as Clara ladled soup into mismatched bowls. "It's just lentils," she said almost apologetically. Daniel took a bite. It was the best thing he'd tasted in years. After dinner, the youngest girl, maybe 5, with curls like dandelion fluff, approached him with cautious determination. "Sir," she whispered. "Are you a cowboy?" Daniel blinked. "What, you live on a hill and you wear boots? Cowboys live on hills." He almost laughed. "I suppose that makes me something like a cowboy." She nodded solemnly. "You should get a hat." Clara chuckled softly from the sink. Over the next 2 days, the house changed in imperceptible, irreparable ways. Daniel noticed first when the hallway no longer echoed. There were voices now, soft layered, punctuated by giggles, and the occasional wail of the baby. Then came the walls. Clara had tacked up a drawing from each child on the pantry door, 7 crayon portraits of stick figures holding hands, one of them clearly meant to be Daniel, with a massive brown mustache he didn't actually have. Then the smells, warm, breadwood, smoke, peppermint soap. The scent of a place being lived in again. Daniel wasn't ready for all of it, but he also wasn't stopping it. On the 3rd day, he noticed a drip from the bathroom sink. Clara had already placed a small bowl beneath it. "You should have told me," he said, grabbing a wrench from the drawer. "I figured you'd come around eventually," she said, teasing. He knelt beside the cabinet and got to work. She crouched beside him, holding the flashlight. "You know what you're doing?" she asked. "I used to," he muttered. When he stood up victorious over the leak, Clara handed him a towel and grinned. "Well, there's still some magic in the cowboy." Daniel looked at her, really looked. There was something behind her eyes, not just strength, but exhaustion so deeply embedded it had become indistinguishable from grace. "Clara," he said quietly, "where did you find the strength to take in all 7? Her smile faded slightly. "Some people collect stamps. I collect souls that no one else wants." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded. That evening, Daniel stood by the window, holding a mug of tea Clara had insisted he try. The snow had begun to melt at the edges, just enough to see the gravel under the driveway. Clara joined him, holding the baby close, rocking gently. "I'll understand if you want us gone once the road's clear," she said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, and realized something strange. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't afraid of his house. He wasn't afraid of the garage, the hallway, or the fourth chair at the table, because somehow she'd fixed more than a leak. She'd started to fix him, and it terrified him. Because once you let people in, you could lose them again. But maybe they'd stay. The fourth door at the end of the hallway had always stayed shut. Daniel passed it each morning without a glance, like an old scar he'd trained himself not to feel. It had been Caleb's room. Yellow walls, spaceship curtains, a shelf of books about astronauts and dinosaurs, and the tiny sneakers that still sat beside the dresser, like their owner would return any minute. After the accident, Daniel couldn't bring himself to change a thing. No one had stepped inside for nearly 3 years, until now. He hadn't meant to leave it unlocked. He'd gone to fetch an extra blanket from the hall closet and left the key on the table. The baby had been fussy, Clara distracted. One of the children, he wasn't sure which, must have turned the knob out of curiosity. Daniel found the door ajar late in the afternoon, the warm yellow light spilling out into the hallway like a ghost. For a moment he couldn't move. He stood frozen at the threshold, one hand tightening around the doorframe. His chest felt hollowed out like the wind had punched through him. Then Clara appeared at his side. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "I didn't realize which one went in. The little girl. The one who thinks you're a cowboy." Daniel gave a tight nod. She didn't break anything. "I wouldn't care if she had," he said, surprising himself. Clara looked at him as if reading something on his face he didn't even know was there. "You can go in, you know," she said softly. Daniel's throat worked. "I don't know if I can." She nodded once. "Then let me." He stepped back and watched her disappear into the room. The door creaked open fully now. He couldn't see inside, just heard the quiet sounds of drawers opening, cloth being folded, paper rustling. 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. When Clara emerged, her eyes glistened. In her arms, she carried a small sketchbook and a plastic lunchbox with faded superhero stickers. "He was bright," she said gently. "I can feel it in the room." Daniel took the lunchbox without a word. His fingers trembled. The stickers were peeling. One read, "To the rescue." He let out a breath that caught halfway through. "Thank you," he said. His voice sounded distant, foreign. "For what?" "For going in when I couldn't." That night, snow fell again, thin and listless, like a curtain being drawn over the sky. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the sketchbook in front of him. He flipped through page after page, robots with long arms and legs, kids flying on rocket shoes, machines that healed broken legs and made pancakes at the push of a button. Caleb's dreams. He'd forgotten how big they were. The last page was unfinished, a drawing of what looked like a garage filled with machines and children laughing. Daniel's name scrawled at the bottom in childish block letters. "My dad fixes everything." His chest tightened. He'd shut the garage because he couldn't fix what mattered most. But Caleb had believed in him anyway. Outside the window, one of Clara's boys carefully placed 2 boots side by side at the porch, setting them just so as if in tribute. Daniel closed the sketchbook and stood. He walked down the hallway and opened the door to the garage. The smell hit him first, oil sawdust dust. Familiar, comforting, painful. He flicked the light switch. Nothing. The power socket was dead. So he went back inside, found the old toolbox behind the furnace room, and fixed the wiring. When the light came on, the garage flooded with soft fluorescence, revealing what time had hidden the half-assembled walker, the 3D printed limb prototypes, the microprocessor bins, labeled in Caleb's handwriting. Daniel stood in the middle of it all, breathing it in. Then he picked up a screwdriver. His hands remembered more than he expected. The next morning, Clara found him at the workbench, sleeves rolled smudges of grease on his face, eyes alive with something she hadn't seen before focus. She didn't interrupt, just handed him a cup of coffee and leaned against the doorway. After a while, he glanced up. I had this idea once, a leg brace that adjusts with a kid's growth, like a shoe that expands. I never finished it. You are now. He nodded. Might as well. She tilted her head. Because of Caleb. No, he said, then paused. Because of them. They both knew who he meant. Later that day, Clara found the children crowded around a table in the living room, making paper snowflakes. The youngest had taped one to the window beside Daniel's coat, where it fluttered every time the door opened. The dandelion-haired girl tugged Clara's sleeve. "Is this our forever house?" she asked. Clara crouched down. "Why do you ask?" "Because the walls feel like they're learning how to laugh again." Clara didn't respond right away. Her heart clenched in that painful, beautiful way it always did when hope showed up uninvited. She kissed the girl's forehead. Maybe it is. Maybe it's laughing already. That evening, as the children brushed their teeth and the baby gurgled in the laundry basket crib, Daniel brought out a box from the attic. Inside were Christmas lights, old photo frames, and Caleb's favorite toy, a plush dinosaur that roared when you pressed its foot. He held it for a long time. Then he walked to the living room and handed it to the boy with the taped suitcase. "It belonged to my son Daniel," said. "I think he'd want you to have it." The boy didn't speak, just hugged the dinosaur and held it to his chest like something sacred. That night, Daniel sat beside Clara on the couch. Neither said a word. But when the baby cried, and Clara stood to tend to him, Daniel reached over, picked the child up, and cradled him to his shoulder. And for the first time in 3 years, his arms didn't feel empty. It was on a quiet afternoon, while Clara was folding laundry in what had once been the guest room, that she opened the wrong drawer. Or maybe the right one. She had been searching for a pair of flannel pajamas for the youngest boy, something warm, something that didn't smell like hay or mothballs. But instead, buried beneath a stack of faded linens and winter scarves, she found a simple manila envelope marked with 3 words in slanted blue ink. For Daniel. M. She knew the handwriting before she even read the note. Matthew. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, the envelope trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't open it right away. For all her strength, for the many border crossings, long train rides with crying babies, court offices that turned her away with blank stares, this gave her pause. The dead did not speak often, and when they did, they rarely whispered what you expected. Finally, she slid the letter out. It was short, honest, and written with the kind of rawness that comes only when a man knows he's running out of time. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to meet her. Her name is Clara, and she's not like anyone I've ever known. She's stronger than she looks, but gentle in ways I never deserved. She's bringing children with her. Not hers, but you'd never know the difference. I've made mistakes, Danny, more than I can count. But this was my attempt at one final right thing. If she makes it to Montana and I'm no longer there, please don't turn her away. Let her stay. Let her be part of something. And maybe if you're ready, let yourself be too. She doesn't need saving. But maybe you do. Matt Clara folded the letter back into the envelope with a shaking breath. The weight of the paper felt heavier now. Not just words, not just wishes. A final tether between brothers, one broken by death, the other, perhaps stitched back together by grace. She walked down the hall, found Daniel in the garage, sleeves rolled elbow-deep in a tangled mess of wiring and plastic joints. His expression was focused, brows drawn in the way that told her he'd forgotten the time, forgotten the weather, maybe even forgotten himself. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. Clara hesitated only a second, then stepped forward and placed the envelope in his hand. He stared at it. "Where did you guest room drawer? I wasn't snooping. It found me." He gave a stiff nod and opened it with rough fingers, unfolding the paper like it might disintegrate in his grip. As he read, his shoulders tensed, then slowly slackened. His face didn't change much, but something behind the eyes cracked just a little. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. He always said too much or not enough. I guess this was his in-between. Clara didn't respond. She let silence do the work. Daniel folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. He believed in people, he said. Sometimes too quickly. But maybe he saw what I couldn't. Clara tilted her head gently. "And what's that?" Daniel met her eyes. That it's not too late to start again. The next few days passed in a soft rhythm. The snow began to melt in earnest, exposing the gravel of the driveway and the first brave tips of grass near the porch. The children took to the open air, like birds released from a cage running in circles, chasing shadows and each other. Daniel built a makeshift swing from a tire and some rope attaching it to the old oak in the yard. The laughter that followed filled the property like music long forgotten. Inside the house felt alive, not just functional. Alive. Clara set up a small corner in the living room with paper crayons and glue sticks, an art station the children called it. Every night new drawings went up on the walls. One was of a cowboy holding a baby dinosaur. Another showed a robot dog dancing under stars. Daniel pretended not to notice the one that showed a tall man fixing a machine, while 7 small figures clapped nearby. One evening, Clara found Daniel on the back porch, looking out over the hills. He held the letter again, worn now from being read and reread. She sat beside him. "Did I ever tell you how I met Matthew?" she asked. He shook his head. He responded to a classified ad in a newspaper. My friend had placed it for me. I was too proud. We exchanged letters for months. He didn't promise much. But he wrote like someone who still believed in beginnings. Daniel smiled faintly. That sounds like him. He was kind, lonely, but not broken. She paused. I think he wanted to give me a home, not because I needed one, but because he did. Daniel turned the letter over in his hands. And did he? Clara looked out at the horizon. Not in the way he imagined, but maybe in a way that still counts. They sat in silence a while, the sky glowing orange with the last of daylight. Then Daniel said quietly, "I'm not him. I know. I don't know how to be what he wanted." Clara looked at him, her voice steady. "I never asked you to be. I only ask you to stay open long enough to become who you want." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "I think I'm trying." That night, as the children slept and the fire burned low, Daniel placed Matthew's letter in a frame and set it on the mantel. Not hidden, not buried, but there, visible, honest, unfinished. A reminder not of regret, but of permission to change, to begin again, and perhaps to love again. The call came just after breakfast. Daniel was rinsing dishes when the phone rang, an old rotary mounted on the kitchen wall, the kind that rarely made a sound anymore. He glanced at Clara, who was busy spooning oatmeal into the baby's mouth, and picked up the receiver. Crane residence. There was a pause. "Mr. Daniel Crane," a female voice asked, clipped and official. "Yes, my name is Cynthia Brooks. I'm calling from the Montana Department of Family Services." Daniel's fingers tightened on the cord. "Yes, we've received an anonymous report concerning children residing on your property under the care of an undocumented individual. I'd like to schedule a visit for tomorrow morning." Daniel's heart dropped. The woman continued, "I'd prefer to do this the easy way. I only need to verify that the children are safe-fed and properly housed. But I do need to see legal guardianship documentation." "Do you have that?" He hesitated. No, not yet. I see. Then I'll be by at 10 tomorrow. Please have all the children and the caregiver present. Thank you. Click. Daniel stood there, still holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a warning siren from a life he thought he'd left behind. He told Clara that evening after the children were asleep. They sat on the couch, a fire crackling low in the hearth. She held the baby now fast asleep in a cocoon of flannel and lullabies. Daniel stared into the flames, the letter from Matthew still on the mantel, now a symbol of something fragile progress. "They're coming at 10, he said quietly. Clara didn't move, for what she asked already knowing. To see if you're fit, if the kids are safe, if you're legal. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. And if they decide I'm not, they'll separate you. Split the children into foster care. His voice tightened. Deport you. Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. I knew this would come eventually. Daniel turned to her, his voice low and rough. I didn't. She met his gaze. You chose to believe in the now. I've lived too long in the what if. He rubbed his face, exhaling hard. There must be something I can do. There isn't time for paperwork. Daniel. No, but... He stood abruptly pacing. Maybe there's time for something else. Something that says, this us is real. Clara stood too. What are you thinking? Daniel looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. I'm thinking it's time I stop pretending we're temporary. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at the dining table, paperwork, spread before him. State guardianship forms, legal affidavits, notarization instructions. Some outdated, some requiring things he didn't yet have. But he filled them out anyway. The next morning at 9:45, the kitchen was spotless. The children wore their best clothes, their hair brushed their cheeks clean. Clara had ironed a button-up shirt for Daniel, and though it didn't quite hide the grease beneath his nails, it helped. At exactly 10 o'clock, a white government SUV rolled up the gravel driveway. Cynthia Brooks emerged, a tall woman with angular features and a clipboard tight against her chest. She knocked once. Daniel opened the door. Mr. Crane? Yes, ma'am, come in. She stepped inside and gave a quick glance around. You understand the nature of this visit, I do. Good. I'll need to see all the children and Miss Clara. She's here, he said, motioning toward the living room. Clara stood the baby on her hip, the other children arrayed behind her, like a choir, silent, solemn, and braver than they should have had to be. Cynthia's eyes swept over them. How long have they been with you? 18 days, Daniel answered. Any legal status for Ms. Clara number, but I've submitted preliminary guardianship paperwork for all 7 children. And I'm working on a sponsorship affidavit for Clara. She raised a brow. You're aware this is highly irregular. I'm aware it's not perfect. But they're safe. They're loved. And this home is the most stability they've known in years. Cynthia scribbled something. Do you have any background on Ms. Clara, any verification of identity? Clara stepped forward, voice steady. I have documents from the UN refugee program and a reference letter from a pastor in Pennsylvania, also a file on each child, their stories, where I found them, who they were before. Cynthia looked up. Who they are now. Clara smiled faintly. My children. There was a long silence. Finally, Cynthia tucked the clipboard under her arm. I'll be blunt. What you've done here skirts the boundaries of legality. But I've seen what chaos looks like, and this isn't it. Daniel straightened. Then what is it? She glanced at the children, then at him. It's a home. When Cynthia left, Clara stood on the porch, steps, arms folded, eyes closed. Daniel joined her. She didn't say, yes, Clara murmured. No, he said. But she didn't say no. She turned to him. Why are you doing this? He met her gaze. Because every time you look at me like this is still a temporary arrangement. I want to prove you wrong. She hesitated. You barely know me. Daniel's voice was quiet. But I know what I was before you came. And I know who I am when you're here. That's enough for me. She studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek. Barely a whisper of touch, but it landed with the weight of something beginning. Inside the house, one of the children started laughing. The sound echoed down the hall. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't flinch. He smiled. Because maybe, the house had started laughing too. The first letter arrived in early spring, slipped under the front door, with no return address and no postage. It was written in shaky block letters, on notebook paper, folded 3 times, and sealed with a strip of clear tape. You don't know what she's done. Ask her who the kids really are. Daniel read it twice before folding it neatly and placing it in the back pocket of his jeans. He didn't mention it to Clara. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when the second letter arrived a week later this time, typed more threatening in tone, but just as anonymous. The timing was too precise to ignore. It came just days after Cynthia Brooks's visit. Someone had reported them once. Now, someone was clearly digging deeper. Daniel wasn't a man easily shaken. But this was the kind of darkness he recognized. The kind that didn't shout it, whispered, slowly eroding trust, one letter at a time. He had a choice to make. So that evening, as Clara stood at the sink rinsing herbs from the new garden plot, Daniel stepped onto the porch with both letters in hand. "Clara," he said. She turned, tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "I need to ask you something. And I need the truth." Her body went still, not defensive, not startled, just still. A practiced stillness Daniel realized of someone who had lived a life of constantly bracing for impact. He handed her the letters. She unfolded one slowly. Read. Then the next. Her eyes did not widen. Her face did not change. "I was waiting for these," she said softly. Daniel exhaled. "So it's true." There's something. Clara looked out over the hills before answering. "There's always something, Daniel. No one crosses countries with 7 children and a pack of hope without a few shadows following. Tell me." She sat on the porch step and Daniel joined her. "I grew up in Kherson, near the Dnipro River. My parents died when I was 13. Too young to know what grief meant, too old to be protected from it. I was placed in a group home. Harsh, but not cruel." She glanced down at her hands. "I left when I was 18. Found work teaching art in Odessa. The salary was nothing but the children. They gave me something to wake up for. That's where I met the first 3. Abandoned siblings. One with a limp, one with night terrors, one who didn't speak for 6 months." She paused. The war came next. Buildings crumbled, borders shifted, and suddenly I had 4 more children with me left behind, at checkpoints, railway stations, refugee camps. No last names, no paperwork. No one claimed them, so I did. Daniel sat in silence, heart clenching tighter with each word. I forged some papers, lied to consulates, took odd jobs in back kitchens and cleaning halls to get passage west. When Matthew found me, I was tired, but not broken, and he offered something I hadn't known in years: permission to hope. She looked up then. "I never trafficked children, never took a dollar. I saved who I could, loved who would let me, and carried us all as far as we could go." Daniel swallowed. "And the man who's writing these letters, I don't know. Maybe someone from the camps. Maybe someone who didn't like seeing an Eastern European woman walk into a white man's farmhouse with 7 kids like she belonged. Maybe just a voice of a world that thinks love has limits. Daniel stood slowly and walked to the edge of the porch. The sky was awash with purple dusk. In the distance, the laughter of children floated on the wind, thin, innocent, utterly unaware. He turned back to her. I don't care who wrote these. I care who I see in front of me every day. And what I see is someone who gave more than most would dare. Clara blinked, but the tears came anyway. Silent, stubborn things. I should leave, she whispered, before they force it, before it hurts them. No, Daniel said, voice firm. You belong here. And if anyone tries to say otherwise, they'll have to go through me. She stared at him, searching his face for cracks in his resolve. There were none. That night, Daniel did something he hadn't done since before the accident. He wrote a letter. Not an email, not a form. A letter, ink on paper, his handwriting uneven, pressed hard against the page. He wrote to an old colleague in Boise, a man who now worked with a legal nonprofit offering aid to undocumented families. He told the truth. All of it. No embellishments. No omissions. Then he folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it on the windowsill, bathed in moonlight like a promise. The next day he returned to the garage. He hadn't touched the expanding leg brace in weeks, not since the visit from the state. But today, he finished it carefully, adjusting the pressure joints, rebalancing the weight load. He held it up, and for the first time it felt ready. He brought it inside and called for Jacob, the boy with the taped suitcase, who limped slightly on his left side. Try this, Daniel said. Jacob stared, hesitant. For me? Yes. With Clara nearby, Daniel helped him into the brace, tightened the straps, adjusted the knee flexion. Walk to the door, he said. Jacob took one step, then another, each one more confident than the last. By the time he reached the door, his posture had straightened. He turned back, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't fall, he whispered. No, Daniel smiled. You didn't. That evening, Clara found the letter on the windowsill. She read the name of the recipient, her hands trembling. She looked at Daniel. You're trying to make us legal. He shrugged. Seemed like the least I could do. She stepped forward and placed a hand over his heart. You're not who you were. He met her gaze. Neither are you. Then she leaned in no longer, hesitant no longer halfway, and kissed him fully. Not like a question, but like an answer. The first time Daniel brought the children into town, it felt like opening a door too wide. He hadn't been to the spring fair in years. Not since the accident. Not since he stopped answering invitations, replying to emails, or returning calls from neighbors who once knew him by name, and now only knew him by silence. But Clara had seen the flyer on the notice board outside the feed store and pinned it to the fridge with a plastic dinosaur magnet. The children buzzed for days. A poster contest, a community bake sale, a talent tent, a place to paint rocks and win jelly beans, and laughter. That part was written between every line. Let's go, she said gently. Let them be seen. Let them belong. So they went. Daniel borrowed the old town van from the church and fastened every car seat with hands more precise than any wrench had ever required. Clara packed sandwiches, juice boxes, a blanket, and 2 emergency socks, just in case someone's got muddy or lost. They arrived just before noon, as the scent of kettle corn and barbecue drifted through the breeze like a parade of memory. The town square was lined with booths, strung with bunting and hand-painted signs. There were pies cooling under netted lids, kids tossing beanbags, and local musicians strumming familiar tunes under the shade of an oak. At first, people stared. Daniel felt it immediately. The pause, the sideways glances, the quiet recalibrations. He didn't blame them. 7 children. One unfamiliar woman. And him, the man who hadn't been seen at a town event since the night of the crash. But then came the ripple effect. Pastor Eugene was the first to wave. "Good to see you, Dan." Then Mrs. Kravitz, who pressed a small apple tart into Clara's hand without a word. By the time they reached the arts tent, the whispers had softened into smiles. The children scattered toward their stations with joyful energy. Jacob entered the poster contest with a drawing of a garage that floated above the ground like a rocket ship. The youngest girl joined the coloring circle and promptly scribbled Daniel's face with purple crayon and a crown. Clara baked lavender scones that sold out in under an hour. And Daniel, he fixed a broken lemonade dispenser, helped realign the dunk tank lever, and said thank you more times in one afternoon than he had in 3 years. But it was the talent tent that changed everything. At 3:00 p.m., Clara signed the children up as the final act. They had practiced in secret, Daniel learned. Every night for 2 weeks after dinner, while he'd been busy in the garage or out gathering supplies. They'd called themselves the Patchwork Choir. The makeshift stage was no bigger than a pickup truck bed. But when the 7 children stepped onto it, barefoot, awkward, glowing with determination, every adult in the audience leaned forward. Jacob opened with a shy, "Hi." "We're new here," nervous laughter. Then they began to sing. A mashup of Lullaby's American folk songs and a verse in Ukrainian that Clara had taught them. Their voices weren't polished, but they were full, honest, alive. Halfway through the performance, the baby perched in Clara's arms beside the stage, gurgled loudly. Everyone laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was the kind of laughter that came after a long winter, the kind that said, "We see you. We're ready to know you." Daniel stood near the back arms, folded, trying to keep his composure. He failed, because in that moment something inside him unlatched. His grief didn't vanish, but it changed shape, became porous, breathable, not gone, but livable. He felt it in his bones. They belonged. And so did he. After the applause faded, the mayor approached them. "I've lived here 40 years, she said, "and I don't cry at these things anymore." She shook Daniel's hand, then Clara's. "If you ever need support for anything, documents, school registration, housing, I've got your back." Clara blinked, speechless. Daniel cleared his throat. "Thank you. That means more than you know." That night, back at the farmhouse, the children ran barefoot in the twilight, chasing fireflies and each other. Clara sat on the porch with her tea. Daniel joined her, still in his fair shirt sleeves, rolled dust on his boots. "They were brave today," he said. "So were you." He glanced at her. "Do you ever think this is too much, that it won't last?" She didn't answer right away. "I've learned not to ask if joy is permanent," she said softly. "I just ask if it's real, and right now, it is." They sat in silence, watching as the last of the fireflies blinked out. Then Daniel stood and disappeared into the house. When he returned, he held a frame. The drawing Jacob had entered in the contest, the garage rocket ship hybrid, had been laminated and mounted with care. Daniel handed it to Clara. "Let's hang this above the mantel," he said. "Why?" He smiled. "Because that's what we've built." She looked at the picture, then at him. A garage that flies, or a family that does. The garage had never been so clean. Tools hung neatly along pegboards, each labeled in Caleb's handwriting, preserved like holy script. The cement floor had been swept, mopped, and repainted in a dusty blue-gray tone that somehow made the whole space feel softer. On the back wall, just beneath the row of utility drawers, Daniel had installed a long wooden shelf. It held a row of child-sized orthotic prototypes, each tagged with a name, Jacob, Mila, Jonah, Sasha. The old workbench, the one Daniel used to dread even looking at, was now a command center of warmth and motion. He'd moved a space heater into the corner, upgraded the lighting, and added a Bluetooth speaker that quietly hummed bluegrass as he worked. But the most remarkable addition wasn't physical. It was the sound. Laughter. Questions. Footsteps too light to belong to anyone over 4 feet tall. Children. They came into the garage now, regularly, sometimes to fetch him, sometimes just to watch, sometimes to tinker with bits of wire and glue and cardboard, creating their own inventions with the wild, useless brilliance only children could dream up. And Daniel welcomed it. All of it. That Tuesday afternoon, Jacob sat on a stool beside him, wearing the final version of the expanding leg brace version 3.5 Daniel had jokingly called it. Jacob had worn it to the fair, but now it had been adjusted for long-term use. Lighter, quieter, and even cooler looking, thanks to Clara and a roll of dinosaur-themed vinyl stickers. "Think it can make me run fast?" Jacob asked. Daniel grinned. "You planning to challenge someone?" "Maybe Mila, but she cheats." Daniel chuckled. "Then we better test it." They went outside and ran. Jacob sprinted across the yard, a blur of skinny limbs and roaring laughter. The brace clicked softly, smoothly, no longer dragging behind, but moving with him as if it had always been part of his body. Clara stood on the porch, watching, her eyes glistening. Daniel came up beside her. "Don't tell him," he said, but that prototype was designed for Caleb. She looked at him gently. "You think he'd mind?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I think he'd be proud it found the right legs." Word of Daniel's devices had started spreading. It began when a local physical therapist visited the fair booth and asked if Daniel still did the work. Daniel had hesitated before saying yes. A week later, she sent over a 10-year-old boy named Drew, whose parents had driven 4 hours just to meet the man who had made a garage into a miracle. Then came a teenage girl with cerebral palsy, a 5-year-old who'd lost her hand in a farming accident, a set of twins with brittle bone disease. Daniel didn't charge them. Not yet. Not officially. He said he was still testing. But each child left with something better than a product dignity. The garage became more than a workshop. It became a sanctuary. And somehow, it began to draw Daniel's soul out of hiding. One afternoon, Clara placed a folded piece of paper on the workbench. Daniel opened it. It was a certificate, printed and official with the town seal, and Clara's full name, typed carefully in bold. Clara M. Korolenko, legal resident sponsored, guardian status, provisional approval, pending permanent review. He looked up. "You did it," he said. "No," she smiled. "You did. Your letter. Your stubbornness. Your courage." She reached across the bench and took his hand. "Daniel, we're staying." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for weeks. "We're staying," he echoed. Then quietly, "Good. Because this house finally fits again." Later that evening, they hosted the first family open garage day. It had started as a joke from Jonah, who declared he wanted to show off our robot army. Clara had made lemonade and brownies, and Daniel had set up 3 of his devices for demo. Neighbors came, more than expected. The garage overflowed with laughter, questions, stories. People brought gifts, tools, materials, an old printer. One man offered to donate a 3D scanner. Someone asked if Daniel would train high schoolers who were curious about engineering. But what stuck most wasn't the gear or the offers. It was the moment Mrs. Lindell, the oldest woman in town, pointed to the wooden shelf, lined with orthotics, and whispered, This place has light again." After the guests left, and the kids had collapsed into sugar-fueled sleep, Daniel stood in the garage alone, surveying the quiet hum of his transformed space. Clara entered barefoot, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She handed him one. "This is what you were always meant to build," she said softly. Daniel turned toward her. It's not just me. No, she agreed. But it started with you saying yes to something hard. He nodded, then looked at her. Truly. Looked. You changed everything. Clara tilted her head. You changed first. There was a long pause. Then Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing her waist, tentative but steady. I never thought I'd feel like this again, he said. Like what? Like my life could start from the middle. She smiled. That's where all the best stories begin. Later, as they left the garage and turned off the lights, Daniel stopped one last time at the doorway. The room glowed from the last filament bulb overhead. A garage full of light. Not because it was well lit, but because it was finally fully alive. The chair had been waiting. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Each morning Daniel had passed it always the same rhythm, glance, wince, move on. It sat at the end of the kitchen table, smaller than the others, painted pale blue and chipped at the legs. It had once belonged to Caleb, and after the accident no one had touched it. Not even to dust. Clara had asked about it once early on. Daniel had simply shaken his head. But that morning, with sunlight pouring through the wide kitchen windows and the smell of cinnamon rolls rising from the oven, the chair sat surrounded by chaos. 7 children darted across the kitchen, bumping elbows, spilling juice, arguing over who got the corner piece of the cinnamon roll pan. The baby was in his high chair, gumming a piece of toast. Clara was at the sink, humming an old folk tune under her breath. Daniel stood with a spatula in hand, amused and mildly overwhelmed. Jacob. He called that's not a race. Car stop making engine noises at the toaster. Jonah Clara added your shirts on inside out. And backwards, somehow. And then, as if pulled by invisible thread, Daniel's eyes landed on the pale blue chair. It wasn't empty. Mila, 5 years old, messy-haired and bright-eyed, was perched there, swinging her legs happily, as she devoured a strawberry with both hands. She looked up, cheeks full. What she mumbled. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart had stopped, then started again, slower, heavier, stronger. The chair wasn't a shrine anymore. It was a seat. For a child. Living, breathing, sticky-fingered and alive. He turned away for a second, swallowed hard, and returned to the stove. When he looked back, Mila had reached for her milk, spilled it, and was laughing as Jonah handed her a napkin. A perfectly normal moment. And Daniel smiled, because that chair would never be empty again. Later that morning, Clara found him in the backyard, sitting on the swing he'd hung from the oak. You okay? She asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah. Better than okay. She sat beside him, knees brushing. It was Mila, wasn't it? He glanced at her, surprised. You saw. I always see, she said softly. He exhaled long and slow. I thought it would hurt. Seeing someone else there. But it didn't. No, she agreed. Because it means the house is breathing again. He looked at her expression, tender. It's not just the house. She tilted her head. What else, me, he said. I'm breathing again, too. That afternoon, the town's community board announced a grant for local innovators. The prize $10,000 and full access to regional distribution networks. The theme solutions that change lives. Clara nudged Daniel with the flyer. You should apply. I don't do contests, he replied. She crossed her arms. You do now. He grinned. Pushy. She kissed his cheek, motivated. So that night after the children were in bed and the kitchen was clean, Daniel sat in the garage with Clara and filled out the application. Name Daniel Crane, project. Title, The Growth Brace. TM, Orthotics that evolve with every step mission statement. Helping children walk toward their future with dignity, hope, and a little bit of joy. When he finished, he looked at Clara. I'm scared, he admitted, of what that people will see me now and think I waited too long. Clara took his hand. Daniel, you didn't wait. You healed. Days turned into weeks. Letters arrived, not the anonymous kind, but real ones. From physical therapists, from families, from a children's hospital in Billings, offering to trial his designs. Each envelope felt like a vote of trust. A whisper of purpose returned. One afternoon, while Daniel was sketching brace modifications, the children turned the living room into a gallery. They hung up drawings, paper chain garlands, cardboard sculptures of inventions inspired by Mr. Dan. Jacob led a tour complete with narration. This is our robot for hugging sad people, and this is our flying wagon for babies who cry a lot. Daniel stood in the doorway, hands on hips, beaming. Mila tugged his shirt. Can I tell people you're my dad? Now? She asked shyly. Daniel crouched beside her, voice thick. You can tell them the truth. She tilted her head. What's that? He smiled. That we chose each other. That night, Daniel returned to Caleb's room. It had remained untouched since the day Clara cleaned it months ago. Now he entered with a different purpose. He sat on the bed, looked at the shelf of books, the space-themed wallpaper. Then he spoke aloud, not expecting an answer. I miss you, buddy. Silence. Then, but I think you'd really like them. They build weird things and talk too loud and leave Legos everywhere. You'd fit right in. He ran his fingers along the edge of the desk. Also, thank you for being the reason I ever started fixing anything. Daniel stood and reached for a box of Caleb's old toys. He carried them out down the hallway into the garage and placed them beside his new prototypes. Because memory doesn't disappear. It integrates. At dinner the next evening, the kitchen table overflowed. 8 chairs now, one added from the barn, hastily repainted. Clara placed a casserole in the center. The baby squealed with delight. Jacob tried to sneak a bite before the prayer. Mila spilled water again. And Daniel looked around the table at the people he loved. People he hadn't known existed just a season ago. People who had arrived like a storm and stayed like sunshine. He cleared his throat. Everyone paused. I just want to say he began. I didn't know what a family really was until you all showed up at my door. And somehow, you brought me back to life. There was a beat of silence. Then Mila said, Can we eat now? Laughter. And for the first time, Daniel laughed too. Not a soft chuckle, not a polite breath. A full, deep, gut-level laugh that filled the room and spilled out the windows like music. The kind of laugh that only comes from a house that is no longer haunted by silence. The morning of the County Innovation Fair arrived like a held breath. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, dressed in the only blazer he owned, slightly wrinkled, older than half the kids in the house, and tight across the shoulders. Clara tried to smooth the lapels while balancing the baby on one hip. You look nervous, she said, smiling. I look like a mechanic playing dress-up, he muttered. Clara stepped back, studying him. You look like a man who's about to change lives. Daniel let out a long breath. I've spent most of my life fixing things that didn't breathe. Now it's different. She reached for his hand. Because now the things you fix love you back. That stopped him. He looked at her, really looked, and something behind his eyes softened. I'm going to ask you something tonight, he said. Clara raised a brow. At the fair, no after. He hesitated. Just be ready. She smiled gently. I already am. The county fairgrounds buzzed with activity. Booths lined the indoor expo center like bright postage stamps of invention, solar-powered plows, hands-free cattle gates, irrigation timers synced to cell phones. Montana had never lacked innovation. It had only lacked visibility. Daniel's booth was modest, a reclaimed wooden table, a single pull-up banner Clara had designed with the children's help, and 5 prototypes of the growth brace TM arranged on staggered shelves. A TV screen looped footage of Jacob running across the yard, the brace adjusting as he moved. People stopped. They asked questions, touched the braces, read the quote, painted in neat script along the front of the table. What if every child could grow without outgrowing their support? Daniel's hands moved with ease. His voice was steady, his explanations clear. He wasn't the silent man of the mountains anymore. He was a builder again. And this time, people were listening. At 2:00 p.m., the judging panel arrived 5 professionals in suits and jeans, clipboards in hand. One was a pediatric surgeon from Billings. Another, a robotics engineer from the University of Montana. They watched Jacob, now wearing the brace, in real time climb a set of stairs built beside the booth. They watched Mila demonstrate the adjustable straps on her doll's tiny mock version. And they listened as Daniel told them the truth. I didn't create this to win a prize. I created it because I had a son who once believed I could build anything. Then I lost him. And I stopped building, until someone knocked on my door with 7 children and enough hope to reignite a house that had gone dark. He looked toward Clara, standing near the back, the baby asleep against her chest, eyes locked on him. This isn't just a device, it's a second chance, for them and for me. There was silence. Then one of the judges nodded, quietly scribbled something down and moved on. By 4:00 p.m., the winners were announced. Daniel didn't hear his name called for second or third because they saved him for last. First prize, $10,000. Full support for nonprofit patent development regional partnership rollout, and the title of 2025 Montana Innovator of the Year. Daniel froze. Clara burst into quiet tears. The children, despite multiple reminders to stay calm, screamed loud enough to rattle the bleachers. When Daniel walked to the stage, he didn't carry a speech. He carried the small framed drawing of Caleb's garage rocket ship. He held it up. This, he said, was my first blueprint, drawn by a little boy with a big dream. He's not here today, but I carry him with me in every design. And thanks to a woman who brought the world to my doorstep, and children who taught me how to laugh again, I'm no longer building in the dark. He looked out at the crowd. I'm building in the light. That night, the farmhouse was alive. Neighbors arrived with casseroles and pies. The porch glowed with string lights the children had hung with more enthusiasm than precision. The garage became a showroom. Laughter poured from the walls. It was, Daniel thought, exactly what the house had been waiting for. He stepped out onto the front porch into the glow of dusk and found Clara leaning against the railing, barefoot, smiling toward the horizon. You survived, she said softly. Barely, he chuckled. They asked for a speech. I almost blacked out. Clara laughed. You did fine. He stepped beside her, then dropped to one knee. She blinked. Daniel, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small silver ring. Simple, honest, hand-polished in his workshop. I don't need a cathedral. I don't need perfect. I just need what we have here. You, the kids, the chaos, the laughter, the life. He held the ring up. Will you marry me, Clara? Her eyes shimmered. Only she said, voice breaking, if we never stop becoming. He stood and kissed her, and the world went quiet. Not because it was empty, but because it was whole. Later, after the last car had gone, and the children had collapsed into pillows and blankets on the living room floor, Daniel stood by the mantel staring at the framed letter from Matthew. He reached up and placed a second frame beside it. Inside was a print of Jacob's poster from the fair, trimmed in red ribbon, the bottom corner signed in blocky handwriting. This house laughs again. Clara joined him, arm around his waist. He'd be proud of you, she whispered. Daniel nodded, his voice thick. I hope so. Then he looked around the house, this imperfect, sacred, stitched-together thing they had built. It had once been silent. Now it echoed with joy. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Whether you're in a quiet town in Texas, a snowy corner of Minnesota, or somewhere far across the ocean, share it in the comments. Your presence here means more than you know. And if stories of kindness, resilience, and unexpected grace speak to you, feel free to subscribe. We're building a little corner of the internet where hope always has a seat at the table. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care of your heart and each other.